This is a story that pops back up in my mind from time to time because I've only told it to a few people, but I definitely feel like it deserves its place in here. It's for sure one of the scariest moments I've ever had as a child. Back when I was around 10 years old, my mom finally decided that it was time for her to start taking her driver's license. But when she began taking the lessons, she struggled a lot. And for that reason, my dad decided that he would do some practice with her, besides the official driving lessons with her instructor, just to make sure she'd pass the upcoming test first try. My little brother and I were attending swimming lessons at this nearby university at the time. Behind a forested area near the university lays this huge student parking area, surrounded by trees which turned out to be basically empty every weekend. My dad saw the opportunity to take my mom here to drive around for a bit, and brought my little brother and I with them since we were too young to stay home alone. We brought a football with us. When we arrived to the parking lot later on in the evening, my parents began their practice. My little brother and I quickly got bored though, and asked if we could go over this little grass field on the side of the parking lot to play some football. My parents let us, since they'd always be able to keep their eyes on us while driving around. After playing for some time, my parents ended up driving around the other end of the parking lot. They were approximately 300 to 400 meters away from my brother and I. Suddenly, this white Toyota pulls into the parking lot. We were playing almost right at the entrance/exit. The car turns around and stops on my right side, with the vehicle facing the exit. The driver rolls down his windows and presents himself as Thomas. He looked friendly, was just good looking and young. I guess would be around 30. This is where things started to get weird. On the passenger seat was a woman, covering her face with a newspaper, and all I could see was long blonde hair. And on the back seat was a baby sat in a baby chair. Thomas immediately states that he's from the police, and that we have to get in the car immediately as he has to talk to us. My brother actually took 2 steps towards the vehicle, but I stuck my arm in front of his chest as I was sensing something was off. The woman was still covering her face at this point and not saying a word. Thomas then raised his voice and told us once again to get in the car, or else he had to come out and get us. My brother and I froze out of fear. Suddenly, the woman put down the newspaper, showing her face, and told us, in the most calm, motherly voice, to just listen to the man. The woman looked young, pretty, and like a person who wouldn't hurt a fly. At this moment, I began screaming as loud as I could. What we hadn't seen at that point was my dad was already running as fast as he could towards us. He was coming from behind the vehicle, so we didn't see it. My parents didn't have the time to drive us since the road down the parking lot was twisted all the way. When my dad heard my scream, so he started yelling as loud as he could, "Hey, who the fuck are you? Get the fuck away from my children." As soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized my brother and I weren't alone, he threw his car into gear and took off as fast as he could. He most definitely looked like a person who shat himself when he saw my dad. My dad was furious and told my brother and I to hurry up back to the car. He didn't even think about calling the police at that point. He wanted to beat up the guy himself. That resulted in us driving around for the next hour trying to find him before my dad cooled down and decided that he should probably just call the police. We never found out who those people were. But this episode taught me to never judge a book by its cover, because people can be the most friendly looking people in the world, still wish evil upon you or the ones you love. I'm not sure what those people would have done to us. I am sure about one thing though. They definitely weren't from the police. This happened a couple years ago when I was backpacking in Australia. I traveled around driving a van, like many backpackers there do, as it saves a lot of money with accommodation. I usually slept in rest areas, gas stations, or wherever I could park. This one night I've been driving for a few hours and started to feel sleepy. I decided to then stop in the next rest area, in the middle of nowhere. Parking in that location during daytime could be a great idea, but at night it seemed like a horror movie location. There were no cars parked there. I know, I should park where there are more people around, but I was really drowsy and with no lights whatsoever. So I turned off the engine and closed the curtains of the van. It was not long before dawn that I heard some heavy knocking on the side of the van. Open up, it's the police. Nothing wakes you up faster than that. My heart was racing. I was just adjusting to the adrenaline rush in my system when they repeated the heavy knocking, saying it was the police. My first thought was that I parked somewhere I shouldn't. But then again, it was the middle of nowhere, and it was a rest area. Before opening up, with my mind telling me that the situation was weird as fuck, I decided to go slowly to one of the windows and look through the gap in one of the curtains. I could clearly see the shape/shadow of the guy standing beside the van. His car wasn't too far, but it didn't have any lights or flashing lights on. This guy was definitely not a cop. Bringing up the courage I had left, I just shouted, "Get the fuck away! I have a gun, and I'm calling the cops on the radio." But I didn't have a radio or a gun, but that seemed to faze him. I saw him getting back on his car, and, to add to the creepiness, someone came out of the bushes and also got in the car. They left just a few minutes after that, turned on my van and drove in the opposite direction they went. Safe to say, I never slept in another rest area that didn't have at least a couple other cars parked. I don't know what those people wanted, but with Australia's history of backpacker serial killers, I'm very happy to be here today. The summer after I graduated high school, I started attending a community college approximately an hour away from my hometown, so I could get a lot of my basic credits done before going to my university in the fall. I attended class in the morning, and that would take an hour-and-a-half drive to my job, where I worked at a nursing home. This happened about twice a week. My college, home, and job are in 3 separate counties, and this is important. It was one of those days where I had to wear my scrubs to class, then drive straight back to work. I didn't notice anything unusual about my classes that morning, nor anything when I was walking out to my car in the parking lot. At the time, I drove a very nondescript white Chevy Malibu. As I pulled onto the main road for my college's entryway, I noticed a police car was directly behind me. This wasn't too unusual because there was a police academy at my college. I started to get worried though, when after a few miles the police car was still following me, and we were bumper to bumper, literally. I told myself he was just probably following me up to the main road ahead. My family's house is in the middle of nowhere, and my mother had previously worked in the city where the college was. Consequently, I knew all the back roads. To assuage my paranoia, I decided to take the back roads home. I didn't think it would take me too much longer to get to work. The light ahead turned yellow, and I knew that I could make it before it turned red, but I didn't think that he would consider I'd sped up and he was trailing behind. I ran the light just as it turned red. He followed me through, and even though some other cars had started going and were honking and slamming on their brakes, at this point I wondered if a Malibu had been stolen in the area and he was running my plates. I told myself that it could somehow still be a coincidence. I decided to slow down below the speed limit, hoping he would pass me. I figured if he was a police officer heading out to a call, he would pass me. We had been driving on fairly busy main roads, and maybe that's why he didn't pass me. The more I slowed down though, the more he slowed down, and now that we were in the country, we were back to being bumper to bumper. I glanced in my rearview mirror to see if I could see his face or his uniform. The person behind me looked like he was wearing a t-shirt, big sunglasses, and a baseball cap. So I started panicking. If he flipped his lights on in the middle of nowhere, should I pull over? If he's not a cop, then I should keep driving. But even if he is a real cop, I could be arrested if I keep driving. Mind you, this is almost a half hour into this ordeal. We rounded a corner, and in my rearview mirror, I saw his car was from the county of my college. In a minute or two, we'd be into another county. I kept driving like normal and waited to see the next county sign. I figured he'd have time to realize I wasn't stopping anywhere near here. If he was a cop looking to give a girl a ticket and was still following her till she did something wrong, it was going to take a while. I eventually crossed county lines and he kept pursuing me, bumper to bumper. I made a few random turns and he still followed. I started to panic even more, so I put my cell phone in my lap and called my dad. I didn't want him to see me talking on the phone and pull me over for distracted driving. So I put my dad on speakerphone and tearfully explained what was happening. He said to stay on the phone and keep driving. He said if the flashing lights come on, keep driving till I hit a populated area or a restaurant or gas station or anything. I knew a main road was coming up that would take me to a McDonald's. I figured I would pull into it and go through the drive-thru. I figured it would give me some time to see him better or he'd just give up. Just a minute away from the main road, he flipped his lights on. Well, shit. I slammed my foot on the gas and took off towards the main road. Him, in hot pursuit with his lights and sirens. I ripped through the stop sign and onto the main road, and then pulled into the McDonald's drive-thru. Heart racing, I turned to see where he was. The cop car was at the stop sign, lights and sirens off, just sitting there. He pulled into the gas station across the road and turned around and headed back towards the city. I noticed that there was no license plate on the car. I finished the rest of the drive paranoid. Luckily at the time I worked with my sister, so I went to her house after work and spent the night, leaving my car at my work's parking lot. I called the police the next day with my dad to report it, but they said there wasn't really anything they could do. They said I probably just imagined the lights and it was just someone in a Crown Victoria former cop car trying to scare a girl. My dad was livid though, so he called his cousin, who was at the time a detective in yet another county, and asked him about it. Detective K, let's call him for the story, that as a girl at 17 I had every right to ignore the flashing lights in the middle of the country roads and drive till I felt safe. He said that a cop may be frustrated that I did that, but as long as I didn't realize I hadn't done anything blatantly wrong, I was scared and alone. Detective K emailed the office in my county, but they were just as stubborn about it before. It was a few years later when I started hearing urban legends about women being pulled over by fake cops and having unspeakable things done to them. If anyone's out there, please stay safe and always have your guard up.